This threat to democracy is hiding in plain sight. In the weeks after the 2020 presidential election, Donald Trump and his allies were unable to get far in their attempts to prove widespread voter fraud. There were two reasons for that. First, there wasn't any, as numerous investigations by journalists, expert reports, and court rulings showed. But second, Republican election officials in multiple states repeatedly said that their counts and recounts were accurate, and they defended the integrity of the election. For all the pressure that the Trump camp brought to bear, well-trained, civic-minded election workers carried out their duty to maintain the machinery of American voting. Many top Republican Party officials and lawmakers have spent the last 2 years striking back, and drawn the most attention for their efforts to pass voter integrity laws that aim to make voting more onerous under the guise of preventing fraud. From January 2021 to May of this year, just under 36 restrictive laws had been passed in nearly 20 states, according to the Brennan Center for Justice. These are pernicious laws, and they undermine Americans' hard-won rights to vote. But just as important is the matter of who counts the votes, and who decides which votes count and which do not. This is where Mr. Trump's allies have focused much of their scheming since his re-election defeat. Their mission is to take over America's election infrastructure, or at least key parts of it, from the ground up by filling key positions of influence with Trump sympathizers. Rather than threatening election officials, they will be the election officials, the poll workers and county commissioners and secretaries of state responsible for overseeing the casting, counting and certifying of votes. These efforts require attention and mobilization from Americans across the political spectrum. America's system of voting is complex and decentralized, with most of the oversight done at the state and local level by thousands of elected and appointed officials, along with poll workers. While it is outdated and inconvenient in many places, this system has worked relatively well for roughly 200 years. But Mr. Trump's attempts to subvert the election also revealed the system's vulnerabilities, and his allies are now intently focused on exploiting those pressure points to bend the infrastructure of voting to their advantage. Their drive to take over election machinery county by county, state by state, is a reminder that democracy is fragile. The threats to it are not only violent ruptures like the January 6 attack on the Capitol but also quieter efforts to corrupt it. A key element of this strategy is dismantling the bulwarks that stopped the assault on democracy in 2020. In Georgia, the top state election official, Brad Raffensperger, its Secretary of State, refused Mr. Trump's request to help steal the election by agreeing to find 11,780 additional votes. In Michigan, the Board of State Canvassers certified Joe Biden's victory despite Mr. Trump's aggressive meddling. A host of other state and local officials, many of them Republicans, pushed back on similarly anti-democratic machinations. Mr. Trump and his allies have set about removing and replacing these public servants, through elections and appointments, with more like-minded officials. In some cases, the effort has failed. In Georgia's Republican primary this year, Mr. Trump backed a losing candidate in a vendetta against Mr. Raffensperger. But in other states, Republicans have embraced election deniers as candidates, including for Secretary of State. In Nevada, the Republican Secretary of State nominee, Jim Marchant, maintains that the 2020 presidential race was rigged and that he would not have certified Mr. Biden's win in Nevada. He blames voting fraud for his own failed House run that year and has said that Nevada voters haven't truly elected their leaders in years because the system is so rigged. Mr. Marchant is a part of the America First Secretary of State coalition, whose candidates are campaigning for measures that would make it more difficult for Americans to vote, such as by limiting voting to a single day and aggressively purging voter rolls. They have the financial backing of pro-Trump election deniers including Mike Lindell, the founder of MyPillow, and Patrick Byrne, the former chief executive of Overstock.com. The Republicans' pick in Michigan, Christina Karamo, is also an America First candidate. She gained political notice with her unsubstantiated claims to have witnessed election fraud as a poll watcher in Detroit in 2020. She has also promoted the baseless conspiracy theories that Dominion voting machines flipped votes in Mr. Biden's favor and that January 6 was a false flag operation conducted by Antifa posing as Trump supporters. The most outrageous GOP choice may be Arizona's Mark Finchem. Mr. Finchem has in the past identified as a member of the Oath Keepers, a far-right militia group, and he spoke at a QAnon convention last year. He was at the Capitol on January 6, although he denies being within about 500 yards of the building. As a member of the Arizona House of Representatives, he introduced a resolution this year to decertify the 2020 election in multiple counties, and was a sponsor of a bill to empower the Republican-led legislature to overturn election results. Mr. Finchem wants to ban early voting and put limits on mail-in voting. In April, he filed a federal lawsuit, backed by Mr. Lindell, to block the use of electronic vote counting machines in Arizona in the midterms. It was dismissed. Installing election deniers as top election officials is just one element of this plan. Much less visible, but just as important, is the so-called precinct strategy, in which Trump allies are recruiting supporters to flood the system by signing up to work in low-level election positions such as poll workers. A prominent promoter of the precinct strategy was Steve Bannon, the former Trump advisor. Last year, Mr. Bannon rallied the listeners of his War Room podcast to sign up as precinct committee members. "We're going to take this back village by village. Precinct by precinct," he proclaimed in May 2021. The call was answered. An investigation by ProPublica in the summer of 2021 found a surge in Republicans signing up to be precinct officers or equivalent lowest-level officials in key counties. Of the 65 counties contacted, 41 reported a collective increase of at least 8,500 new signups following Mr. Bannon's call to arms. ProPublica found no such spike on the Democratic side. The precinct strategy has been endorsed by Mr. Trump, who declared it a way to take back our great country from the ground up, and adopted by segments of the Republican Party.